The night I realized my life might belong to someone else, I didn't scream. I didn't move. I didn't even open my eyes. I simply lay there, pretending to be asleep while every heartbeat echoed louder than the whispers drifting through the dark apartment. What I heard that night shattered every illusion I had about friendship, trust, and family. For a few terrifying minutes, I truly believed I would never see another sunrise. But sometimes the darkest nights become the beginning of the brightest second chance, and mine started with words I was never supposed to hear. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness still exists, that people deserve second chances, and that hope can appear even in life's darkest moments, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Dad's Second Chance. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. I was 24 years old, fresh out of college, carrying more debt than dreams. My father had passed away when I was 16, and my mother worked herself into exhaustion trying to keep our tiny home together. When she became sick, I promised I would finish school, find a good job, and give her the peaceful life she deserved. But life doesn't always reward promises. Jobs were scarce, bills piled higher every month, and the only place I could afford was a crowded apartment shared with 3 strangers I had found through an online listing. It wasn't glamorous. Peeling paint covered the walls, the plumbing complained every morning, and every room carried the smell of cheap instant noodles and old furniture. Still, it was a roof over my head, and at that point, survival mattered more than comfort. At first, my roommates seemed ordinary enough. They laughed together, cooked dinner together, and often included me in conversations. I was grateful because loneliness had become my closest companion after losing my father. They knew about my struggles, about my mother's illness, about how every paycheck disappeared before I could even enjoy it. They even helped me move my few belongings into the apartment. I mistook shared meals for friendship and casual smiles for loyalty. Looking back, I realized desperation often paints people kinder than they really are. One rainy evening, I came home exhausted after working a double shift at a warehouse. My back ached, my hands were blistered, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I skipped dinner, collapsed onto my mattress in the corner of my small room, and drifted into a light sleep. Hours later, I woke to muffled voices coming from the kitchen. At first, I assumed they were simply talking late into the night. Then I heard my own name. Every muscle in my body froze. Their footsteps approached my room before stopping just outside the partially closed door. The apartment had become eerily silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. I kept my breathing slow, pretending to remain asleep, while their whispered conversation became clearer. They weren't arguing about chores or rent. They were discussing me. One voice casually wondered who would get me if things went according to their plan. Another laughed softly before suggesting they should decide fairly. My heart pounded so violently I feared they could hear it through the mattress. My imagination filled every gap the whispers left behind. I didn't know exactly what they meant, but nothing about their tone sounded harmless. I had never felt so powerless in my entire life. I stayed perfectly still until dawn. Every minute felt like an hour. I imagined countless possibilities, each more frightening than the last. The apartment that had once felt merely uncomfortable now felt like a trap. When morning finally arrived, I quietly packed the few belongings that mattered most while my roommates were still asleep. I left without making a sound, carrying one backpack and less than $50 in my pocket. For the next few days, I slept wherever I could. Sometimes it was a bus station bench. Sometimes it was the break room at work during overnight shifts. Pride disappeared quickly when survival became the priority. I couldn't tell my mother because worrying her would only make her condition worse. I felt completely alone. One afternoon, after finishing another exhausting shift, I noticed an older man sitting outside the warehouse entrance struggling to lift several heavy boxes into the back of an old pickup truck. Without thinking, I walked over and offered to help. He thanked me with a warm smile that reminded me of my father. After we finished loading everything, he asked why someone my age looked so exhausted. For reasons I still can't explain, I told him everything. Instead of judging me, he invited me to sit down at a nearby diner. Over coffee and a simple meal, he listened more than he spoke. His name was Robert. He had owned a small furniture restoration business for decades and had recently lost his only son in an accident. Loneliness had become his companion too. Before we left, he surprised me with an offer. He needed help in his workshop and had a small room above it that had been empty for years. The pay wasn't extraordinary, but it included a safe place to sleep. That tiny room above the workshop became my sanctuary. The work was difficult but meaningful. I learned how to restore old tables, repair broken chairs, and breathe new life into furniture that everyone else had given up on. Robert often said that people weren't so different from old wood. Sometimes they looked damaged beyond repair, but patience, care, and belief could reveal beauty hidden beneath years of pain. Every day I worked beside him, those words slowly repaired something inside me as well. Months passed. My confidence returned. I paid off some of my debts. My mother's health improved after I could finally afford better treatment. For the first time in years, hope felt stronger than fear. One evening, while organizing old paperwork in the workshop office, I mentioned the conversation I had overheard in the apartment. Robert encouraged me to report it, even if I wasn't completely sure what it had meant. Curiosity eventually pushed me to contact the building manager, who quietly admitted that several complaints had been filed against those same roommates over suspicious behavior involving vulnerable tenants. Authorities had already begun looking into multiple reports. Hearing that confirmed I hadn't imagined the danger. Leaving that apartment had likely saved me from becoming another victim of whatever plans they had been making. Instead of filling me with anger, the realization brought overwhelming gratitude. I thought about how one simple decision to help an older stranger with a few heavy boxes had completely redirected my future. If I had ignored him that afternoon, I don't know where my life would have ended up. Kindness had rescued me in the exact moment I needed it most. Years later, Robert officially retired and handed the workshop over to me. I couldn't believe the trust he placed in someone who had once owned nothing but a backpack and a handful of regrets. Together we transformed the business into a thriving community workshop where struggling young adults could learn valuable skills while rebuilding their own confidence. Some came from broken homes. Others had escaped difficult situations similar to mine. Every piece of restored furniture carried a story, and so did every person who walked through our doors. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about woodworking. It was about people. The ones who appear friendly aren't always safe, and the ones who quietly offer kindness often become family. Blood doesn't always define who stands beside you when life falls apart. Sometimes strangers become fathers, mentors, brothers, or lifelong friends simply because they choose compassion when they could have walked away. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Dad's Second Chance. Every interaction helps these stories remind others that even after fear, loss, and betrayal, a second chance is still possible. Special request: comment below with the words, "Kindness changes lives," if you believe one act of compassion can completely transform someone's future. Today, whenever I lock up the workshop at sunset, I sometimes remember the terrifying night when I lay perfectly still, pretending to be asleep while believing my future was slipping away. At the time, I thought I had lost everything. I couldn't see that life was quietly guiding me away from danger and toward a family I hadn't even met yet. Looking back now, I no longer remember the fear as the ending of my story. I remember it as the moment that forced me to walk toward a future filled with purpose, healing, and hope. Sometimes surviving isn't the miracle. The real miracle is finding people who remind you that your life has always been worth protecting, and that no matter how broken yesterday may have been, tomorrow can still become your greatest second chance.